Welcome everybody to the fifth in this fantastic series of events at the Wheeler Centre for Books, Writing and Ideas. I'm Ramona Koval, and it has been and it will be my pleasure to introduce these 10 fascinating lectures on some of the seminal texts in Australian literature. We're running these events as a result of some alarming news we heard last year, which was it was possible for some students at Melbourne University doing a literature degree to spend 3 years without doing one Australian poem or one Australian novel. So they took it upon themselves to organise an informal series of people coming along to the university and talking to the students on a Friday afternoon about Australian writing and Australian literature. And the Wheeler Centre decided that we would put on an Auslit series of our own, an Auslit 101 series. And tonight we're going to be looking at Ray Lawler's play, The Summer of the 17th Doll. Before I introduce our lecturer, Alison Croggon, I just wanted to say a few words about Ray Lawler, who of course wrote the play. He was also an actor and a director. He played the role of Cane Cutter Barney in the 1955 premiere of the play. It was the 10th play he'd written. He was born in Footscray, the second of 8 children of a council worker. He left school at 13, he worked in factories, and he began writing plays at 19. Summer of the 17th Doll was an enormous success for him, and after that he wrote for stage and television in England and Denmark and Ireland between 1957 and 1975. He returned to Australia permanently in 1975. He joined the Melbourne Theatre Company as literary advisor and script assessor and associate director till 1987, after which he retired. As I said, The Doll was the 10th of his 16 plays. He always expressed surprise at the enormous impact of The Doll. He thought he'd written a nice night's entertainment in the theatre, and it was also a vehicle for him as an actor, because he said that there were very few roles for short men. So, and Barney was a short man, but a very attractive man. When he came back to Melbourne, he decided to work on two other plays that were part of a trilogy, the Doll trilogy, Kid Stakes and Other Times. And this Doll trilogy had its first performance at Russell Street Theatre on the 12th of February 1977. It was taken up as a play. It was widely promoted as the first sign of a renaissance in Australian drama. It was a model for, I suppose, a new school that would represent Australians to ourselves and kind of define the national character. It was a huge popular success and single-handedly financed the early season of overseas plays promoted by the Elizabethan Trust. It was reported that people drove hundreds of kilometres and a man swam a flooded river to see it in the Northern Territory in 1960. But in London, The Doll won the Evening Standard Award for the best play in 1957. I just wanted to say something about the language. Lawler, as I said, grew up in a very working class family. This is what he said. I went to work when I was 13 and I worked in a factory for 10 years, a foundry. I had the ripest Australian accent in the entire world, and my use of language was absolutely from the soil. I knew no other until I got interested in theatre. In those days, you see, the great difference in going to the theatre was that there were no Australian plays as such, and there was no place left for an Australian actor in an Australian theatre. The first thing you had to do was get rid of your Australian accent, or as much of it as you possibly could. That was absolutely essential. What usually happened was that you worked and you saved money and you went to England. I remember I had great difficulty trying to work myself into this strange world, this refined world of theatre as it was then. I can remember in one of the very first plays I ever did, I had a line where I had to come and say, "You people have picked the best spot on the ship." And I came in on rehearsal and said, "You people have picked the best spot on the ship." And this went on for a couple of rehearsals until one of the ladies of the cast, who had conquered her Australian accent a long time ago, drew me aside and said, "Ray, there's no such word as yous. The word is you." And I looked at her in astonishment. I said, "No, Kath, it's only you when there's only one of yous." But when there's more than one of yous, it's yous. But what did the English think? The Daily Express, this is according to Bruce Grant, who wrote in Meanjin in 1957. He says the Daily Express heading was, "The Aussies bring us the play of the year." And that was a sort of fair summary of their enthusiasm. The heading of the Daily Mail was, "This doll is fair dinkum, cobber, just fair dinkum." Alan Dent of the News Chronicle found the play pure Australian and remarked on the rich Australian accents, so remarkably like Cockney in their way. But the weekly press took the analysis a little further. Kenneth Tynan of The Observer, famous critic, led the praise. This is according to Bruce Grant. Tynan, who has an ardent following among youthful and intellectual theatre-goers and reluctantly admired by many older and conservative patrons, said, "Last Tuesday, one of Her Majesty's subjects turned up with a play about working people who are neither grim nor funny, neither sentimentalised nor patronised, neither used to point a social moral, nor derided as quaint and improbable clowns. Instead, they were presented as human beings in their own right, exulting in universal pleasures and nagged by universal griefs." He reckoned that Mr. Lawler has been described as the Australian Tennessee Williams. The Australian press excitedly reported, of course, the London success, but was disappointed when it wasn't repeated in New York. A film version you might have seen in 1959 with Ernest Borgnine and John Mills as the tough Australian heroes was set not just up the road in Carlton, as Ray Lawler wrote it, but in Sydney, so that shots of the Harbour Bridge could be included. Well, our lecturer this evening is poet, novelist, playwright, opera librettist, literary journal editor, blogger and award-winning theatre critic Alison Croggon. She has a deep and celebrated understanding of the sweep of literary forms, and it's my great pleasure tonight to welcome her to talk to us of Ray Lawler's Summer of the 17th Doll. Please make her welcome.
Thanks, Ramona, and thank you for all coming out tonight on this beautiful day. To anyone familiar with Australian theatre, Ray Lawler's Summer of the 17th Doll is a monument, the most famous Australian play ever written or produced. Like many monuments, it generally stands unnoticed in the background, covered with dust and sundry pigeon droppings, and every now and then it's dusted off to remind us about the achievements of Australian culture. As I said in a review of Neil Armfield's recent Belvoir Street production, which I saw at the MTC earlier this year, one of the paradoxes of art is the uneasy legacy of success. As soon as a work is labelled a classic, it becomes curiously invisible. It transforms into a monument, cobwebbed by all the extraneous things its success now symbolises, and the energies that made it a success in the first place are polished away by the pieties that must now attend it. Summer of the 17th Doll is a good example. A fixity in the Australian theatrical universe, a symbol of nationalistic pride, it too easily becomes a thing instead of an act. It even has a nickname, the Doll, which I will be using. The significance given to the doll as a unique, groundbreaking Australian drama, the great Australian play, has meant that it has been largely read through a lens of cultural identity, which I think is partly true, but has inadvertently obscured some of its interesting aspects. I agree with everyone that it's a thoroughly Australian play. Its cultural status also has had a side effect of obscuring other plays of the time that might have an equal claim to attention. All the same, it deserves its place in theatre history. I don't believe it's a great play. Australian playwrights have arguably written works of greater theatrical and literary significance, and even in its own time it broke little new ground. It opened in London the week after the premiere of John Osborne's The Entertainer, which starred Laurence Olivier. Next to The Entertainer, The Doll, as a well-made three-act play, appears a little old-fashioned. But it's churlish to deny that The Doll remains a compelling drama 60 years later. It's a realist tragedy that still has the capacity to strike home. If anything makes a classic is the ability of a work to remain vivid, a quality of suppleness that allows it to speak to us powerfully in times different from those in which it was written, and The Doll certainly qualifies. Lawler's play has suffered from its classic status as much as it has benefited from it. The nimbus of nationalistic pride, and especially the masculine ethos that goes with that, has tended to obscure it. Armfield's magnificent production earlier this year revealed it to be a play of more complexity and genuine power than is usually assumed. I hadn't seen it or thought about it much since I saw the 1978 MTC production in high school. For me, as for many others, it was a dusty part of our theatrical heritage, an achievement worthy of genuine respect, but perhaps not of huge intrinsic interest. Armfield's production reminded me, first of all, just how well written it is. It's an impeccably structured play without one ounce of fat, in which every utterance works inexorably towards its shattering climax. The other thing that struck me was that in Olive, then played by Alison White, we saw a protagonist every bit as tragic, every bit as iconic as Willie Loman in Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. For me, Olive is the central character. Hers is the desire which holds the dream together and which finally destroys it. Although the tragedy in the play belongs to all the characters, it belongs most of all to Olive. Lawler's story of itinerant cane cutters who migrate to Melbourne every summer for the layoff is a parable of fantasy coming into brutal collision with reality, and like all tragedies, a meditation on mortality. For 16 years, Rue and Barney have returned to their lovers, Olive and Nancy, for a white-hot summer of love in the Carlton boarding house run by Olive's mother, Emma. Each year, Rue brings Olive a Kewpie doll as a token. But now Nancy is gone. She has married a bookshop owner and settled down. Olive, refusing to face the implication of Nancy's desertion, has roped in her barmaid friend, the respectably widowed Pearl, to take Nancy's place. When the boys arrive, it's clear that all is not well. Rue is broke, and his and Barney's relationship simmers with unsaid hostilities. These have been catalysed by the arrival of a young ganger, Johnny O'Dowd, whose youthful virility shows Rue that he isn't the man he once was. As the play continues, the idyll crumbles under the sceptical eyes of Pearl. Against Pearl's sardonic observations, the other observer, Bubba, a young girl who lives next door, stubbornly asserts its reality. Rue gets a job at a paint factory and finally, in the conclusion, proposes marriage to Olive, a proposal she rejects in horror. In the final scene, Barney and Rue, both broken men, leave the house forever. The Doll employs an Australian idiom that has largely vanished from our cities, with the broad vowels and supple ironic wit that later became caricatured as a larrikin or the ocker. In Lawler's hands, it's plain and unexaggerated, the speech of working-class people. The play's three-act structure is similarly unadorned. Armfield's stripped-down production exposed the bones of the play and showed what it has always been, a startlingly well-written text of its time and place, but resonating beyond them. As John McCallum notes in his book Belonging, Australian Playwriting in the 20th Century, The Doll was the first professionally produced Australian play outside the commercial theatre to receive any serious professional support and backing. He argues, rightly I think, that much of its subsequent success was in luck and timing. It's worth remembering here the fate of Oriel Gray's The Torrents, which was, with The Doll, joint winner of the Playwrights Advisory Board's play competition. In fact, the judging panel considered The Torrents the more complete play, but Gray's work, without the support of a production, sank into total obscurity. This illuminates a major aspect of theatre writing, which doesn't apply to works such as poems or novels. Playwrights must have a theatre to write for, and a play isn't complete until it's produced on stage. This makes a play an impure art form, as it necessarily becomes the point of focus for a range of other disciplines that together produce the finished, or perhaps, to steal the phrase from Duchamp, the finely unfinished work of art. Because of this, there's been a lot of discussion in recent years on whether plays can be considered proper literature. If the text is subject to such instability, to the rigours of interpretation and reinterpretation through the visions of directors, designers, actors, musicians, can it really be thought of as a literary art? Some playwrights, inverting the literary snobbery too often directed against their art form, themselves resist the idea that plays are literature. Myself, I don't see the argument. To me, it makes no sense at all to deny that plays are literature, especially in an Anglo culture which considers its greatest literary genius to be Shakespeare and which traces its roots to Aeschylus. You can read plays just as you can read other books, and they exhibit all the qualities we expect from other literary writing: formal curiosity, style, intellectual and emotional engagement. Well, at least good plays do. No matter how good they are, playwrights need a theatre to write for, and in the 1950s it scarcely existed. The Doll, with its unapologetic Australian vernacular, its invocation of the bush legend and its contemporary urban setting, burst on the scene in 1955 with stunning effect. According to critic Catherine Brisbane, it was a household name within a year of its premiere. Most of all, The Doll was rapturously received as a mature play, a statement that Australia was, at last, growing up and asserting its unique identity in the world. This, of course, was reinforced when it went on to a highly successful London season and was made into a Hollywood film starring Ernest Borgnine, which I'm told is best forgotten. When it opened at the Elizabethan Theatre in Sydney in 1956, Lindsay Brown in the Sydney Morning Herald struck the note. This fine play, untranslatably Australian in all its accents, gave Australian theatre goers the chance to feel as American audiences must have felt when O'Neill first began to assert American vitality and independence in drama, or the Irish must have felt when Synge gave them the Playboy of the Western world. This was real and exciting Australiana, with Australian spirit springing from the deep heart of the characters and never merely pretending that Australianism is a few well-placed bonzes, two rights, strike-me-luckies and good-os. J. Griffin Foley in the Daily Telegraph wrote similarly. "It has happened at last," he said. "Someone has written a genuine Australian play without kangaroos or stockwhips, but an Indigenous play about city dwellers." Obviously, Indigenous meant something slightly different from what it usually means now. As those reviews made clear, The Doll was lifted up on a burgeoning nationalism, a hunger to assert Australian identity unapologetically in the face of our colonial heritage. John McCallum traces the various readings of the play. As he says, The Doll is so well known and has been written about so widely that it's difficult to discuss it without cliché, or more importantly, without supporting one or more of the standard critical perspectives. Is it a socio-cultural document of its time, or an individual drama of personal interactions? Is it a story of the failure of childish illusions, or a proud assertion of a new vision? Is it a hard-nosed study of a new urban Australia, or a sentimental elegy for a lost past? In 1978, Catherine Brisbane wrote that it was a play about growing up, locating its meaning firmly as a statement about Australia's national identity. It is about growing up, she said, and growing old and failing to grow up. And the study throws into relief not only the failures of a dilapidated Melbourne household, but the character of a nation. She placed it in the context of a struggle for national cultural identity. In the 1950s, as Brisbane put it, Australians had a yearning to mix in terms of equality with those older civilisations thousands of servicemen had glimpsed during the war. She said that Lawler had unconsciously drawn upon the major themes of our literature: man pitting his strength against nature, mateship and freedom and alienation in the itinerant life this vast country offers, rugged individualism and the resilient humour that shrugs off despair. He presses these country-bred virtues into a new urban context and gently questions them one by one, finding behind the sun-blessed strength a tragic lack of spiritual resource. This points to a common interpretation of the play as a tragedy of inarticulacy. As Brisbane says, one of the qualities of the play is the economy with which Lawler expresses the inarticulate nature of the characters and the way the deprivation of language is related to a deprivation of spirit and intellect. I take mild issue with this. Lawler's characters, from Olive's battler mother Emma to Bubba, all seem on their own terms perfectly articulate to me. I'm troubled about the class judgment implied here, since these inarticulacies are seen to be the result of being uneducated working class characters. It's perilously close to saying that the inability to express feelings means that those feelings don't exist. Lawler certainly positions the unseen Nancy as smarter, a woman who's forever reading books and who escapes the impending doom of the layoffs by marrying a bookshop owner. But I'd suggest there's a profound ambivalence here. And underlying this ambiguity is the fact that it's the very articulacy of these characters that allow them to build their alternative reality, that the myths that they have constructed around their relationships are built very much on the imaginative capacities of language. Olive heroicises the image of rural masculinity symbolised by Rue and Barney. As she says, for years they have flown down from the south, two eagles flying out of the sun. She vividly portrays them to Pearl as the epitome of untrammelled sexual force. Nancy used to say it was how they'd walk into the pub as if they owned it. Even just in the way you walked, you could spot it. All round would be the regulars, soft city blokes having their drinks and their little arguments, and then in would come Rue and Barney. She always reckoned they made the rest of the mob look like skinned rabbits. Just as it's language that builds the myth, it's language that ultimately tears it down. Now nearing their 40s, Rue and Barney both find to their bafflement and anger that they are no longer young, that their youth and vigour, which they took for granted, has deserted them. But it takes Pearl's innocent laughter at Barney's toast to glamorous nights to rip away the final rags of the illusion. After that, they can no longer deny that they are getting old. Rue decides to cut his cloth to his new circumstances. He's prepared to get a regular job just like the soft city blokes and to make an honest woman of Olive. Barney, once the epitome of sexual charisma, finds himself mocked by the women who once succumbed to his charms. The quintessential henchman, Barney shifts his loyalty to the new alpha male, Johnny O'Dowd. Reading the critiques of the doll now, it's striking how the action of the play is read primarily through its male characters. Olive's desires and struggles are seen as subordinate, certainly secondary to the drama of the men. In 1987, Jane Cousins wrote that Rue is the term of reference and Olive merely the site at which his new identity is to be confirmed. The final image in the play is of the two men leaving together after a sudden, uncharacteristic gesture of genuine friendship from Barney, in which he touches Rue's shoulder and gently leads him away. Here the glossy ideal of mateship that the two men supposedly embody is stripped of its mythos and reduced to a single moment of insight and compassion. I'm not sure that this gesture really legitimates, as Cousins claims, a nostalgic return to the imaginary unity of the outback hero. It's far too ambiguous. In its unexpected tenderness, it could as easily be seen as the introduction of a feminine understanding into the aggressively masculine ideal of mateship. The character who's most invested in the ideal of the layoff is Olive herself. She is the person who passionately resists change, who will destroy everything rather than compromise her dream. Olive is a huge role, both emotionally and in terms of her presence on stage. We see her well before Rue and Barney. She drives the action, and the dramatic climax belongs to her. So why is she so often read as secondary to the men? Lawler himself, implicitly rejecting the grander notions that he was making a narrative of Australian identity, said that he thought the play was simply a play about alternatives to marriage. With this in mind, it's worth looking again at the relationships. Olive has mostly been seen as the foolish, immature woman clinging to unrealistic dreams. Joy Houghton places her with the infantile feminine imaginary, seduced by an illusion. Brisbane says of the famous scene in which Olive rejects Rue's proposal of marriage that it is a woman's response that is needed here, but Olive in Rue's care has never grown to womanhood. She wants not marriage, but her girlhood restored. Cousins considers Olive as a site of feminine resistance and conflict in the constitution of a national character, and concludes, this requires an analysis of the formal constraints in which the attempt to change the meaning of the dominant Bush image of national identity led to the staging of contradictions within this figure as a conflict between the masculine outback and the feminine city. Critics have hailed the doll as the agent of a positive transformation of the national character, but this character, secure within its humanist and phallocentric frame, remains predictably unified, univocal, and gendered masculine. I read the doll rather as a damning critique about the difficulty of sustaining equality in sexual relationships in a society in which roles for men and women are rigidly defined. The dream that is destroyed is a dream, Olive's dream, of equality. Behind this is a hint of another Australia, one that in the late 19th and early 20th century is bridged the urban and rural divide. This is the Australia that was thought of as the working man's paradise, in which the rural sharing unions were as crucial to social progress as the building unions in the cities. The country that was the first to introduce the 8-hour day and only the second to give women the vote. I think it's not too much of a stretch to read the doll as an elegy, a portrayal of how this possibility, this vision of Australianness began to vanish after World War II, when working class aspirations began to give way to the middle class values espoused by Pearl. It's certainly uncontroversial to say that the conflicts in the doll are driven by socially gendered constraints, symbolised most powerfully by the marriage which the major characters have rejected. But if we take Olive to be an active protagonist rather than a passive reflection of the men, it seems to me that Olive isn't rejecting the feminisation of the outback hero so much as demanding those outback masculine freedoms for herself. She seeks instead to reconstitute these freedoms in an urban context, making herself a mate as well as a lover. When she hears that Rue is broke, she says aggressively, "What's wrong with me? I'm working, ain't I?" Rue, defending his masculine pride, tells her he won't budge off her and insists he will get a job. but Olive herself has no problems at all with the idea that he might be financially dependent. Olive's resistance to marriage has been taken to be a proof of her refusal to grow up. It's seldom been seen as a resistance that goes to the heart of her autonomy as a woman. At the end of the play, in a brief but significant moment of rapport, Rue says to Olive, "You know, a man's a fool to treat you as a woman. You're nothing but a little girl, about 12 years old." Olive's response is to refer to her job. "Try telling that to the mob on a Saturday night." Rue insists it's true all the same, and then attempts to persuade her to take the day off work. It's an offer that Olive tellingly refuses. Olive is usually taken at Rue's estimation, but seldom at hers. In her own eyes, she is an independent working woman. If she marries, she loses her freedom. She becomes indeed the dependent female that she's ironically been often considered in criticism. By entering marriage, she gives up her name, her autonomy, and especially her financial independence. In the 50s, married women lost their jobs, just as Nancy has had to leave the bar to be with her bookshop owner. For Olive, this means giving up her life. With Rue away for 7 months of the year, she can have her cake and eat it too. The layoff, she tells Pearl, is not just playing around and spending a lot of money, but a time for living. "You think I haven't sized that up against what other women have? I laugh at them every time they try to tell me. Even waiting for Rue to come back is more exciting than anything they've got." This statement has usually been taken as an assertion of Olive's dependence on Rue rather than as an assertion of her independence. Yet when it comes to the crunch, Olive gives up her man, but she won't give up her job. Our last sight of her is after the dream has crashed. In a magnificently melodramatic moment of renunciation, Rue kneels down and tells her, "This is the dust we're in, and we're going to walk through it like everyone else for the rest of our lives." Olive reacts with physical anguish, doubling over herself on the floor, as if, as it says in the stage directions, cradling an awful inner pain. What she's mourning is her sexual life, which is now over. The trade-off that women must make, choosing between autonomy and sexuality, is now inescapable. Perhaps the worst possibility of all is that the equality she thought she had never really existed. That's the real betrayal in Rue's proposal. To him, she is only a little girl. In the face of this, stumbling with shock, she does the only thing left to her. She picks up her bag and goes to work. In The Doll, Lawler puts both masculinity and femininity under the burning glass. The roles evaporate in the heat of the drama and reveal desperate people seeing through a glass darkly, aware of how they are trapped but unable to do anything about it. None of the characters is socially conventional, but for all their refusal of their allotted roles as dutiful working husband or suburban wife, they remain trapped. Rue and Barney in their limited ideals of manhood, Olive and Pearl and Nancy in different imprisonments of femininity. Their tragedy is that in the society in which they live, there is no escape for them. The only alternative to accepting the deathly conventions they have endured all their lives is absolute loss. I think that central dilemma is the reason it remains such a powerful play today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fantastic reading of the play for us. As always, we're going to have a couple of people with microphones up the sides, and whenever you want to ask a question, your hand goes up and then you wait for the mic. There's a hand up there. Just before we get the mic to you, I just wanted to say that this, I haven't seen it for years. I didn't see the last production, but I read it in the last week. And as a text, because it's got so much in the directions that Ray Lawler's written, I felt it really stood up as a piece of writing.
It does, yeah.
And I felt it was so tightly written. There's not a wasted line. Could you talk a little bit more about how well written it is? I mean, why?
I mean, it was one of the things. I don't know how many people here saw the MTC production. A few, yeah. Oh, a lot. Good, yeah. But watching it, I was just going, my God, it's a well-written play. And you could see that in the performances, that they were absolutely inhabiting the language and how active it is. I mean, it's really clear when you see it performed, because there's no wastage, and time really matters on stage. So the action just moves all the time, and that's about really good structuring.
So that's you can see that. You can see something fall flat if it's a theatre work. If you feel that there's there's conversation there that doesn't need to be there. Is that what you mean?
Oh, you do. Yeah. I mean, if you're watching a play and suddenly something's just without that vitality and that economy, perhaps there's a palpable langueur, but you feel it when you're reading a novel, and you feel it when you're reading the play text too, that suddenly your attention lapses. It's just not as vital.
And it's not you, it's them.
Well, it might be you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm not actually talking about the text per se, but I'm very interested about the influence. When Summer came out, late 50s, it's one of those rare moments, particularly in Britain, where Australia was looming large. You had, in the arts, you had Nolan, Drysdale, Friend, Boyd, all of those ones. In stage, Joan Sutherland, Barry Humphries, Peter Finch, etc., etc. And Summer fits right into that, and it's possibly one of the reasons it was so successful in that time. But I'm curious, it's a two-part question. Could you talk maybe on the influence that Summer had, that the Doll had, for, say, Australian plays in that period, or playwriting? And secondly, can you think of another time when all of this confluence came together, when Australia, creativity in all the arts, but particularly theatre, came together in the same way that it seemed to come together in Britain at the end of the 50s, early 60s?
That's interesting. I mean, with the first question, John McCallum addresses this in his book. Because, I mean, it was so... I must say, when I was watching it, I felt the same kind of pride, oh my God, a wonderful Australian play. But he argues that the new fashion for, realism on Australian stages really didn't produce that much work in the tradition, if you like. That it was a fairly short-lived and not very big tradition. But that what it did do was show people that it was entirely possible to do an Australian work with Australian accents in that context Lawler was talking about in the introduction, and for it to be the most enormous success. And that in itself led to people, devoting... I mean, it's taken a really long time, and the thing about creating a theatre in Australia is a long, complex and tormented history, really. We're very lucky now that there is one, but these things take time. But there have been, a lot of really good Australian plays written since that perhaps were encouraged by the success of the Doll. I mean, the really terrible thing when you do look at Australian playwrights over the last sort of 60 years is how short-lived most of their careers are, and that is about that kind of institutional support. As for the second question, I actually don't know how to answer that. Maybe there's other people who might have a better idea, but it's not something I've thought about. Australians have always had a presence in Britain, and still do now, usually going native there, I think. And I mean, a few years ago they seemed to be running every institution, like the Royal Festival Hall and everything else. But so yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that, but it's a really interesting point.
We mustn't forget also the influence of organisations and the politics of money, and the Elizabethan Theatre Trust was founded in 1954 to, quote, make the theatre in Australia the same vigorous and significant force in our national life than it was in England in the reign of the first Elizabeth. So, the money was there, the ideas were there, let's put on a play, and Summer of the 17th Doll walked into that.
That's right.
But you need that
play, yeah.
structure, don't you?
Yes.
You need that everyone saying, this is what we're going to do, and it's important.
Yes. Crucial.
Another question. There's one at the back. Is there one? Yeah.
Good evening. Just wondering if you can comment on the symbolism of the Kewpie doll, because that's what always comes to mind. And you don't see too many Kewpie dolls anymore, not even at the Royal Melbourne Show. But it's something that I absolutely adore, purely because of that play.
Oh, right. I used to wonder what they were until I saw a picture.
You could get them at Luna Park for a long, long time, couldn't you?
Yeah. Do they
They're
still
things
exist?
on sticks.
Yes, I know.
Flimsy little dolls on
with
sticks
the big
with
skirts.
feathers or something in skirts.
In the play, Olive says, that's because they always bring presents down from the north, but the Kewpie doll is what's special to her because it's what Rue thought of himself. It was his idea to bring the Kewpie doll. So to her, they symbolise their relationship and what it means. And the way that she's sort of put them all around the room is like a manifestation of what this myth is that they're living.
And she can't bear to put the 17th anywhere else except this little room, which is a kind of sacred hall to Kewpie dolls.
That's
but
right.
Then at the end,
and then they smash
it, and she realises it's crap, really.
Yeah, I mean the last thing Rue does is smash the Kewpie doll to bits.
But it falls apart, and it's just very flimsy.
But it's the new one he smashes, isn't it? I think
they're all pretty flimsy.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by the character of Pearl.
She is fascinating.
I think Pearl, Pearl's, it sort of epitomises to me all the restraints of the 1950s of the well-brought-up girl. And she's really quite a withheld self, very protective of her daughter. Would you be able to comment on Pearl?
Perhaps for people who haven't seen it or read it, we should describe who Pearl is and what her role is and what she does.
Yes, Pearl is the replacement Nancy. She's a barmaid at the pub with Olive, and she's a widow. So when we first see her, she's dressed in her respectable black, and she is very nervous about meeting these outlaw men. But also fascinated because she's there and she's heard all the stories from Olive about, how amazing they are, what men they are. So there's a speech she gives when, what breaks things up with Barney, because she does get together with Barney, is that Barney wants to invite her daughter, she has an 18-year-old daughter, to the races, and she takes total offence and says, no, I got led into that way of life when I was a girl, and that's not going to happen to my daughter. So Pearl has a past. She is not as respectable as she tries to appear, but she wants that respectability, and she definitely wants it for her daughter. So she's a quite ambivalent character in the play. I mean, she's a locus of a lot of the comedy. Certainly in the production I saw that she's very funny.
Well, she's got her bags packed, and she's left them at the bottom of the stairs, and until she meets this bloke, she's not going to allow her bags to go upstairs.
No, that's right.
She's sort of very buttoned down.
Absolutely, but she still enters this arrangement, but she domesticated. You see her knitting for Barney's illegitimate children, making jumpers for them, because he's got them all over Australia.
He's the short one.
He's the short one, the Ray Lawler character, we might. But so she kind of domesticates it, and she's insensitive to Olive's, romanticised idea of it. So that's where a lot of the comedy comes from. But I also think Pearl's got quite a lot of pathos. and in the end a fair amount of dignity, actually.
Well, she really does. She wants to get married.
Yes, I
even,
mean, that's
even
the hope.
these sort of characters who are coming down, who she disapproves of.
Yeah, no, I mean,
she's
there
a
is
bit of desperado.
Well, she's lonely, I imagine. You know, and maybe this is a chance to have a relationship, you know, later in life. And she says that, frankly, maybe it is, but she can't come at, her daughter being exposed to this, and that's where she is offended and leaves. So she has these very strong ideas about being a mother as well. She's the only character in the whole play who's a mother or a parent, apart from Barney, who's not quite a father. But he does pay maintenance, he insists.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting that you first saw it as a teenager, as I did around the time I did it in year 12, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I was a late teenager, and I thought it was a good play, but it didn't mean a lot to me. And then I saw it a month ago in my mid-30s, and it spoke to me so much more. And I think because I tend to see it as a play about growing up. And so people of my age have got that issue of, do I want to be autonomous or do I want to settle down? And so it really speaks to that struggle that a lot of people my age have.
What did you decide when you saw it? Who's the lucky girl or boy?
What did I decide? Oh, I firmly believe that people have to grow up in the sense that, as do societies. So the other analogy I see in this day and age is with movements like the Tea Party that seem to say, oh, well, we shouldn't consider anything done past 1790 as interesting, and there's no sense in which society should grow up and take on new morals. So I think there's two things going. It really speaks to me both because of the social sort of movements, especially in the US and here to some extent, and the sort of issues to do with people in my age group. So I wonder if you could reflect back on seeing it as a teenager as well.
Well, the funny thing is that when I was writing this piece, and I was trying really hard to remember the production I saw, I hardly remember it. I remember it through the photos that there are in books of that production. I know I saw it, and I can remember Kewpie dolls, and it was in the very tiny Russell Street Theatre. And like I said, I hadn't seen it since. Like, I was talking to other people after the opening of the 17th Doll, and they were going, oh, and another production of the 17th Doll, and I was going, wow, it's a good play, it's a really good play. But I had, so that gap makes it hard to, I'm obviously much more grown up, older, all those things, so the pathos of the ageing and the dilemmas of losing youth obviously speak to me. But I think in the production I saw, it was very clean. It was stripped of a whole lot of, Australianisms, if you like. It was directed like as if it was a tragedy, like a Miller play or a Chekhov or any other tragedy. And for me, that just exposed it. There was a simplicity in the production that allowed that emotional life to really flower and illuminate it. And I think that was a large part of just going, my God, what a play. As in terms of the political things, I mean, growing up and the Tea Party is the completely conservative, repressive side of, extremist politics, if you like, and it's hard to kind of relate that to the play in terms of these are people who rather are not conservative people, and their growing up for them means buckling into, or in these circumstances, means buckling under those conventions, or, for Olive, she has to, I think the only thing ahead for her is to be like Emma, her mother, don't you think? That's the role that she now has, is the single, older, perhaps eccentric woman. I find that a bit hard to link with the play.
But I do agree with you that when I read it, of course, she doesn't want it to stop because she doesn't want to have, 5 months of the year to do what she likes with by herself.
That's right. I think people forget that. It's sort of like she's all on her own, so it's really sad. And I think, no, she's probably having a great time.
Yeah.
When I saw the play, initially I sort of reflected upon it as about growing up. But then, probably about a week later, when I thought about it, I had more of a sense, not about them not being able to grow up, because I felt that they were, in one sense, actually grown up, because, you know, they took those jobs and they stuck at that routine. But to me, the play was more about people who couldn't go forward because they couldn't see a concept of what forward looked like. And Pearl was sort of the juxtaposition there, in the sense that she did have a purpose, albeit that it was her daughter, and so to her, marriage had a purpose to create this concept of what she could see to be her future. Whereas in the other two main characters, I gained a sense it wasn't about them growing up, but about two people who, particularly because of their limited economic circumstances, couldn't articulate or picture for themselves a future that was other than, well, in Rue's case, it was clearly quite frightening, because he would know that at some stage the cane cutting just wouldn't be possible. So he couldn't grasp a future or conceive what his future might be. And similarly, I gained that sense out of her as to what actually, so for both of them, they had that same common problem, that they couldn't see a future, which, particularly because of their economic circumstances, would be basically about working and put a meal on the table for kids to get off to school, etc. So to me, the play was more about not growing up, but being able to cast a future. And so it was a bit broader than that.
But, I mean, wasn't it? I mean, this whole idea of marriage, and Rue sort of basically he was defeated, wasn't he? He was defeated, physically defeated, morally defeated, growing older, failing as a man, and this was, all right, well, marry me then.
That's right.
And you think, I don't think so.
Yeah. No. And it's also the thing of what marriage meant. I mean, you know, for him it meant being tied into, you know, a factory job and going off every morning, coming home.
He won't be much fun anymore, really.
There's a scene where he's humiliated because Barney brings all the cane cutters over for a drink, and Rue's just come home from work, and he's in his work clothes, he's filthy, he's covered with paint, and he feels his utter humiliation. He's really angry. And for Olive, the same thing. You know, what does the marriage mean? Getting married mean? It means for her something much smaller. She can't work, she'll lose. I'm sure the thing about working, she refers to all the way through, that she'll lose her financial independence. And, you know, whatever her education, she knew that was important to her. And so I think, and it wasn't possible. You know, I think the thing is, it's not possible in that world to think of an alternative to those roles. Those are the roles they had to play with.
It is about playing too, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes,
and
absolutely.
The romance of playing.
Yeah. And what's wrong with that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we're not hearing you.
Oh, I do. Hello.
That's it.
I was only going to say that I don't think they wanted to face reality. None of them did. They were happy in their life as it was, and that's what they were looking forward to, and they couldn't handle it when it collapsed. That's all.
Yeah.
Yes, at the back.
Yes, if you talk about Olive being the protagonist, I would suggest that perhaps Pearl is the antagonist, and she's presenting the alternative to what Olive wants.
Yes, I think that. Well, you know, I mean, it's a play about all those people. I was just so struck by Olive not, you know, being so sidelined when she's so central in all the things I read, but Pearl is definitely, the interlocutor to, and the sceptical questioner of Olive's expressions all the time, isn't she? I mean, they make an interesting. They are antagonistic often, and they're an interesting pair actually, because they do reach a kind of understanding at the end.
Thanks. Since you offered a feminist reading, I was wondering if you could comment on the role of Bubba in the play. Sometimes I feel like she's just a device to bring on argument between the men. Sometimes I feel like she's a symbol of the innocence that they've all lost. I don't know, what do you think? Yeah.
I sort of took her as kind of like the Pearl character, in that she's another...
Do you want to explain who Bubba is?
Oh, sorry. But Bubba's the young girl who lives next door, and ever since she was a little child, she's been privy to this world of the layoff, and she's enamoured of it. She thinks it's the most wonderful thing. And at the end of the play, we're left with Bubba being the one who says, no, it was real and I want it for myself. I can see it's a mess now, but I'm going to have it for myself. But I think, like Pearl, she's one of the observers. So Pearl's there looking at this kind of tawdry reality, going, what's all this about eagles? And Bubba's saying, no, it was real, I saw it, it was what they said it was. So there's that movement between two of them. The whole thing about illusion and reality is relative, through every character in the play, except maybe Emma. What do you think? Emma's the mother. She's another observer.
She's seen it all.
She's the one who's seen it all and who kind of delivers the sentence at the end, if you like. But I think the feeling that I get from the play, just from the text, is that all these views of the situation all have their own truths, and you feel that as the play plays out, that there are validities. It's not so much that this is true and that's a lie, but that all these things are simultaneously true and not true. It's one of the reasons it's such an interesting play, I think.
But it doesn't
I'm not sure I answered your question.
Feel constructed like that. It doesn't feel like... a lot of often these sort of analytical conversations, you say, this person represents that and this person represents this, and then we've got this and that, or the pairs of action and reaction, or... it's probably not... It hasn't probably been written like that, has it?
No, of course it... you are watching... realistic three-hander, however many, three-act tragedy. And so all these characters have actually quite complex interactions, which is why they're so, why you watch it, really, don't you think? I'm sure they're not written saying, Pearl is, X.
I'll sort of wheel X in here to have this function.
That's right. If you see plays like that, they're pretty deadly, actually. You want them to be people, and people are complicated and contradictory, like Pearl being respectable, but on the other hand, being attracted to Barney. Those kinds of contradictions make fictional characters real, I think. Because
literary critics say, well, why does this play appeal to so many people? Why are we on the edge of our seats? What is it about it? And then you sort of do the analytical work about, well, it could be this, it could be that. But that's not necessarily how it comes together.
Oh, I don't presume to know what Ray Lawler was doing or what he thought he... you said that he says that he thought he wanted to write a really entertaining play, and that's probably fair enough. But and then everybody goes along or reads it and thinks what they think, and that all ends into these kinds of discussions. The more you think about something... I like thinking about work I read or see, because the more I think about it, the more engaging it is, and it's just interesting to do, just personally.
And when you do review the next play and the next play and the next play, how much are you aware of these sort of points in the map, like the doll? When you say, well, how do I review this play in terms of what's gone before?
Well, I hope I am. I think part of criticising is noting context and influences, and one of the problems in Australian theatre has been the terrible lack of memory we have for our theatrical culture. Sometimes it's like there isn't a memory at all. And you know, something that was done 10 years ago might as well have been 100 years ago. It's important to bring all those things into dialogue, but not to the point where it sits on top of it and obscures what is new, what is interesting as well. I mean, all these things work dynamically. It's very clear in the theatre, I think.
Well, time now just to remind you that both Readings in the State Library and Embiggen Books, opposite the Wheeler Centre up here, stock all the texts in the Auslit 101 series. So if you're keen to buy these books and you can't find them anywhere else, you'll find them at those locations. And next time we're going to be meeting, not next week but the week after, on the 19th of April. We're going to be looking at Patrick White's novel Voss, and our lecturer will be literary critic Peter Craven. So I'd like you to come again, bring your friends. But first, tonight, let's say thank you to Alison Croggon for illuminating Ray Lawler's work for us tonight. And thanks for coming.